Now, as the name of the video implies, this is the 8th part of a story, so if you haven't seen the first several parts yet, I'd highly recommend starting at part 1, and if you like it, making your way back here for this part, or this likely isn't going to make any sense to you. Links to all previous parts will be in the description below. And now, without further ado, let's get back to the story. We start by seeing nothing but darkness, and hearing the sound of soft mechanical breathing, much like the breathing of Darth Vader, only a bit more subtle. And then slowly into focus we see the demon-like mask of Darth Ison, and we think it's only the mask until we see a pair of black, gloved hands rise up, take hold of the mask, and attempt to remove it from their face. But they seem unable to. That's when we slowly begin to pull back and see, laying on some type of metallic surgical table, and surrounded by medical droids and strange devices, is Darth Ison herself. And as she continues to try and remove the mask, we hear her breathing intensify as she seems to get more and more nervous and desperate to remove the mask that she once made. That's when, standing and looming above her, comes into view a tall, lanky Kaminoan, who immediately says to her, "It would be unwise to remove that mask, young one. It is the only thing keeping you alive, after all." That's when we hear Darth Ison say, her voice slightly mechanical now, "What did you do to me?" The Kaminoan looks incredulous and says back, "What did I do to you? Well, I saved your life, and you're welcome for that." She then says back, What happened to me? All I can remember is..." But she stops herself and begins to breathe even faster as realization seems to dawn upon her. That's when the Kaminoan lowers his head a bit and gives a slightly sympathetic look and says, "Let's just say you were taken apart by Lord Vader. Now, how I managed to save you, though, is truly incredible. Once again, I seem to confirm to myself that I am truly the master of..." But before he can finish, Darth Ison cuts him off and says, "What do you mean, taken apart?" The Kaminoan then replies, looking her over as if impressed with his own work, "You were taken apart with a lightsaber, my dear, and I managed to, shall we say, put you back together? Though you will be in this suit for the rest of your life." Darth Ison raises a gloved fist when she hears that, and catches him in a forced joke and says, "You claim to be a master, and this suit is the best you could do?" She then lets him go, and while rubbing at his neck a bit, the Kaminoan replies, "Oh, no, it wasn't the best I could do, not even close. It was, however, what Lord Vader commanded of me, to put you in the suit, I mean. I could have made you almost as good as new, but I'm afraid he demanded otherwise." Slowly but surely then, Darth Ison's breathing comes to a more steady state, as she seems to contemplate everything that's happened to her, before finally saying, "Wait, if you could have saved me without putting me in this suit, couldn't you also get him out of it? Couldn't you save Lord Vader?" The Kaminoan then replies, "It's different for him, my dear. For a great many years now, I've been studying the Force, first for Lord Sidious and now for Lord Vader, who have both demanded that I create the perfect clone soldier for them, one gifted with the Force yet ultimately subservient, as the original clone troopers were. And these soldiers would then be mixed with genetic material from a few other creatures and species to make them even better in many respects." The Kaminoan then raises a hollow projector and clicks a button, and we see a blue image of a large beast, and he says, "The Xylo beast that attacked Coruscant during the Clone Wars, for example, has skin so tough it can resist lightsabers. Sidious wanted me to find a way to make his perfect soldiers have skin that could do the same, and, well, so I have." We then see Darth Ison nod her head a bit, and she says, "You're talking about the Star Commander project, which means you must be the famed Dr. Search." "I am indeed," Dr. Search replies with a proud grin. Darth Ison then says, "None of this explains why you can't get Vader out of his suit, why you can't save him." To that, Dr. Search says, "Curious how much concern you have for getting him out of his suit, especially since he just put you in one of your own." Darth Ison raises her hand again, but does not force choke him this time, and instead just demands he give her answers. So Dr. Search explains, "The Force is an oh-so-tricky thing, my dear. I've barely scratched the surface of understanding it, and I'm one of the most brilliant minds in the galaxy, and I've also devoted almost my entire life to it. Anyway, the dark side is what you would call a corruption of the natural world, and those who use it in turn corrupt their own bodies, and slowly destroy themselves from within. Vader's immensely strong connection to the dark side makes it impossible to free himself from that suit. It's almost as if his body rejects it." Darth Ison then says, "So you've tried then? You've tried to get him out of the suit?" The doctor nods and says, "Well, of course I have. I've tried twice now. Once years ago after Sidious was destroyed, and once more recently. And I'm afraid I failed both times, though I did fit him with a new suit this last time." Darth Ison nods and then says, Yes, I saw it right before right before he did this to me." She's quiet for a moment and then says, "So there's nothing you can do to save him then?" The doctor shrugs and says, "If he rejected the darkness and came back to the light, perhaps he could be saved. But I think we both know that's not possible at this point." Darth Ison is quiet for a long moment and then says, "Yes, I suppose that is impossible." She's quiet for another long moment before then saying, "What I don't understand is you said you could have made me as good as new." Dr. Search gives a bit of a shrug and says to that, "Perhaps because you are much younger, my dear, and the dark side has not corrupted you as it has him. Or perhaps there is another reason." Darth Ison then demands to know what that reason might be, and the doctor only replies quietly, "I think you already know the answer to that, and so does Lord Vader, which is why he has put you in the suit in the first place, I would surmise." We then switch scenes, and we're now with Rey and Ben Solo as they trudge across the desert sands of Jakku during the waning hours of the day, and off in the distance we can see a large Imperial facility of some kind. That's when we hear Rey say, "I can't believe I'm risking my life for a guy I just met." To that, Ben shakes his head and says, "You're not risking your life for me. You're risking it to get yourself off this rock." Rey thinks on that a moment, then nods and says, "There's only one outdoor landing platform, and it's on the roof of the main building." To that, Ben frowns and says, "And how exactly are we going to get up there?" Rey shrugs and says, "Easy, we climb." Ben looks at her and his frown grows even more. "I'm not much of a climber," he says. And to that, Rey smiles at him and says back, "I used to climb around the base all the time as a child. Drove my parents crazy because they were afraid I'd get caught and get us all into trouble." She shrugs again and finishes, "So if I could do it then, you could certainly do it now." Ben remains silent after hearing that, and then Rey continues, having second thoughts about all this, but Ben quickly shakes his head and says, "No, I have to get back to the New Republic. There's so much I have to tell my mother." So much. Rey gives a slight nod as if that makes some sort of sense to her, and then says, "And what about me?" Ben gives her a curious look and says, "And what about you?" Rey responds, "What are you planning on doing with me? Where will I go?" Ben gives a small shrug and replies, "Figured you would have been daydreaming about where to go and what to see once you got off this rock for years now." To that, Rey immediately says back, "Of course I have, but I never thought it'd actually happen." Ben turns his head and looks upon the Imperial facility and says with a casual ease, "You could always come with me to Coruscant. I'm sure I could find a position for you on my senatorial staff, till you get your feet under you and figure out your next move, that is." To that, Rey smiles and says, "Ben, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. When I first found you in the wreckage of your ship, But she cuts herself off and Ben says, still not looking at her, "Don't worry, I feel it too." We then switch scenes and get a shot of a small Jedi shuttle flying through hyperspace before we're taken on board and see Ahsoka Tano at the controls when suddenly she says to seemingly no one, "I can sense your presence." That's when, behind her, we see an ancient-looking figure in gray robes, and though his face seems so old that the skin is almost petrified, there is still an air of youth in his bright blue eyes. The figure then takes a few slow steps forward and carefully settles himself in the co-pilot seat next to Ahsoka, which is when she says to him, "I see you broke your vow to never again travel and interfere with events, and now it will cost you everything, won't it?" The ancient figure nods his head, and in the youthful voice of Ezra Bridger replies, "I had to try one last time. All of this is my fault. I have to do whatever I can to fix it, even if all this traveling between different times and places forever severs my connection to the living force and costs me my life, which it very, very soon will." But Ahsoka quickly shakes her head to that and says, "No, Ezra, you can't blame yourself for all this. You had no way of knowing how meddling with events, how saving me would change things. You did what you thought was right, just like you always do." Ezra lets out a snort and replies, "Meddling, that's a good way to put it." Ahsoka sighs and says, "I didn't mean it as bad as it sounds, but looking back, you should have let me die on Malachor. If I died then, I never come find you with Luke and Sabine, and you and Thrawn are never rescued from that strange world you were marooned upon. And then you never find your way back to the world between worlds." Ezra then continues, "Which means I wouldn't have continued to meddle with things, to try to put everything right, only to make it all worse." The two are quiet for a moment, and then Ahsoka says, "Then again, we have no way of knowing that things would have turned out any better had you not saved me. They may have turned out much, much worse." Ezra shakes his head and then says, "Not sure they could get much worse than they are now. Vader knows about the world between worlds, knows about it because of me saving you, And now he's gotten his hands on a piece of a portal and is trying to find a way into the world between worlds to change the past. He thinks his grandchildren may be the key. It is then that a spark of hope is ignited in Ahsoka's eyes, and she says, would that be such a bad thing? If Vader goes back and stops himself from ever becoming Vader in the first place, if he remains Anakin Skywalker, maybe everything is avoided. To that, Ezra says, yeah, that's a lovely thought and all. Too bad I don't think that's what he wants to change. Instead, as far as I can tell, he seems focused on going back to Mustafar, to saving Padme and helping his old self destroy Kenobi. All he does now is stare at the portal stone and watch their battle over and over again. The spark of hope in Ahsoka's eyes then dies, and she hangs her head and falls quiet before suddenly blurting out, wait, you said grandchildren. I thought Ben was the only one. Ezra gives a shake of the head and says, no, there is another Skywalker, Erba, daughter of Luke and Mara Jade, and now the apprentice of Darth Vader. Again, Ahsoka hangs her head, and that's when Ezra says, Luke of course doesn't know, and even I didn't know till very recently. The dark side of the Force has done all it can to hide her existence from anyone on the light side who would seek to save her. Ahsoka then asks what she should do, and Ezra says as he shuts his eyes and leans his head back, there is a secret Imperial facility on Jakku, and soon Ben Solo will be there, and you alone can save him now. Ahsoka nods and asks, and what about you? Ezra manages a faint smile and says, take me home please, take me to Lothal. Ahsoka nods and is about to say something, but Ezra says, don't worry, if you take me there now, you should arrive just at the right moment to try and save Ben. Any earlier, and he won't witness everything he needs to, so that he can begin to understand. Again, Ahsoka nods and says, and once I save him, what then? Ezra says, tell him to go to Malachor. Luke will need him. Ahsoka thinks for a moment and then says, don't you mean I should take him to Malachor? Or is there something else I need to do? Ezra opens his eyes and looks at Ahsoka, but says nothing. That's when Ahsoka shuts her eyes, and after a moment sighs and says, I understand. And the scene ends. We now get a shot of Darth Vader's Super Star Destroyer in orbit over the world Jakku, before we're taken on board and we're with Darth Ison, who is in a small, dimly lit room, probably her personal chambers, wearing of course her new mechanical suit, which is much sleeker and more streamlined than Vader's was, and she is looking upon a datapad where we can see, beamed to her no doubt by the probe droid still following them, the image of Rey and Ben Solo making their way across the sands of Jakku and towards the Imperial facility just as the sun is beginning to set. That's when we hear Darth Ison say to herself, is this all a test? You all but begged me not to kill him, not to kill that weak fool Ben Solo, but maybe I was supposed to. Maybe I was supposed to give in to my anger, to disobey you and destroy him and prove myself somehow. She shakes her head and tosses the datapad away, and stands in silence for a moment before clenching her fist and saying, no hesitation this time. I will destroy Ben Solo, whether it is what you wish of me or not, for his death is what I desire. She then quickly moves and picks up the datapad she threw away, punches a few buttons, and on the now cracked screen, we see an image of Hux appear, wearing a white Imperial uniform, and to him she says, Director Hux, 2 intruders are approaching the facility in a likely attempt to steal a ship and escape the planet. Hux then, with a smug grin, says, I wouldn't concern yourself with it, Lord Ison. Nothing will get past my security. But to that, Darth Ison shakes her head and says, no, Director, I don't want you to stop them. I want you to see to it that they are not interfered with. I will be there to deal with them myself soon enough. Hux then gives her a distasteful look and says, I'm afraid I don't take orders from Vader's pet. If 2 desert vermin are about to try and steal a ship from my base, I will see to it that their heads are removed from their shoulders. To that, Darth Ison gives a little wicked laugh and says, fine then, but any harm that comes to them will be visited upon you tenfold by me. Before Hux can even respond, Darth Ison hits a button on the datapad, and the image of him fades away. That's when the scene shifts to just outside the Star Destroyer, and we see a small Jedi shuttle come out of hyperspace and immediately start to make its way down towards the planet. That's when we're briefly taken into the ship, and watch as Ahsoka takes a deep breath and then shuts her eyes. And a moment later, the scene shifts again, and we now find ourselves within the Super Star Destroyer, within Darth Vader's chambers, and we see that he is once again gazing at an image created by the stone, and once more, it is of Anakin and Obi-Wan fighting on Mustafar. Suddenly then, Vader's gloved hand snatches the stone and plunges everything into almost absolute darkness. A moment later, we can just make out as Vader hits a button on the chair-like apparatus he sits in, and a few seconds later, an image of Grand Admiral Versio appears, and she asks, "My lord, what is it you require of me?" To that, Vader says, "Have my ship prepared for immediate departure." The image of Versio seems taken aback, and she says, "I'm assuming this has something to do with the small craft we just detected coming out of hyperspace? Certainly this is something we can take care of for you, my lord." But Vader quickly says, "No, Grand Admiral, this is something I will deal with myself." And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this part of the story, and what you think might happen next. So leave a comment below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.